water. Are we good? Oh, we are good. All right, thank you, everyone. So this is the first plenary of the conference on open access and the opportunities and challenges it presents for university presses. Those of you with keener eyes will notice that not all of us listed on this slide are here today, unfortunately. So Hannah Hope from Wellcome, who was meant to be part of this panel, is unwell, unfortunately, so she wasn't able to join, which is a shame. And I have some notes, actually, that Hannah provided beforehand, so we'll talk through some of her points as well. So we're going to talk about, as you can probably guess, the challenges and opportunities that OA presents for university presses today. So I'm joined by Kate Petherbridge from the White Rose University Press and Ruth Harrison from Imperial College London. Kate's going to give a short presentation in a minute, and then Ruth is going to talk through some talking points as well from her perspective and her institution's perspective. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A afterwards. So on that note, hand over to you, Kate.
Thank you. This is going to be odd because I can't hear where I'm coming from, and I also wander and will click, so apologies if it all goes a bit sideways at this point. So my name's Kate Petherbridge. I am press manager for White Rose University Press, and for those of you who aren't familiar with us, White Rose is the university press operated by the White Rose Libraries collaboration. So it's one of the things we do. We got shared repositories, and we also look at other places where the university libraries of Leeds, Sheffield and York can collaborate. So we've got digital skills programs, we're investigating open educational resources. So, but as the library-led press for White Rose University Press, we are the academic house, publishing house for Leeds, Sheffield and York. So it sounds like we're huge, but we're not. The entire staff for the press is in this room now. I'm going to embarrass her. Lucy, do you want to give us a wave? Lucy is the other half of the team. So there we go. The story that we have is we've been around for nearly 10 years now. I say we. I wasn't there at the start, but not much after. And we were one of the first wave of the new university presses that came out in sort of the mid-teens. There was quite a few of us that launched at that point, and more new university presses have kind of joined the group as we've gone on since then. We've been fully open access from the start. Primarily digital with a focus on OA, obviously, but also offering print. We do books and journals, and we work with authors from across the entire academy. So while we are the academic press for Leeds, Sheffield and York, we don't just serve those authors. We would work with any authors from across the academic field. And we work across every discipline as well, so we don't have an area of focus like that. We will work with anyone with a viable and worthwhile project. We are very much consider ourselves as part of this wider open publishing ecology that is emerging across UK HEI. And in terms of how we operate, we deliver publishing as a service. So we are library-led, we are part of the scholarly comms infrastructure that the libraries provide. So as well as doing the viable open access publishing routes with all the appropriate academic rigour and processes that academics would expect, we also do a lot of support and information and guidance as well. So, and I think it's interesting that this is about challenges and opportunities for open access brings for university presses. As you can see from everybody in the room and everybody that engages with Redux, university presses are not all the same. I mean, we are at one end of a spectrum. You could argue that OUP is perhaps at the other end of a spectrum, and all of us in between bring something to the academic publishing sphere now, I think. The fact that all these different models and options have evolved shows that there's been this need for diversity, and it gives that academic choice that they value so much. And increasingly open access is a factor in the choices that academics are making, whether because of their own drive to work with an open access press or go an open access route, or a funder drive, institutional priorities, external factors like ref. It's becoming more and more important to them, and they're becoming more and more educated in open as well. So that's something that we're very excited as an open access press to see. One of the things on the kind of blurb for the session was about the role of the university press. And going back to what I've just said, the role of the press will be different depending on your press, what your drivers are, what the mission of your press is, how big a factor open access is in your operation. For us, I can only really speak for us, as a university press, obviously the main thing is that we want to have a viable open access publishing route. That's what we're for. That's why we were founded. And in doing that, by viable, I do mean, fully viable in terms of what an academic author would want that to look like. So all that academic rigor of the commissioning process, all that support through the quality of the output. So that's really important to us. But advocacy and engagement is a huge part of what we do. For a small team, half the team is dedicated to kind of comms as a significant part of their role. And that's not just the comms that you'd expect around authors and publications, but we have to do still quite a lot of work to promote the press itself and that wider open publishing work that we do. So it's a significant part of what we spend our time on. And also, as I said, we spend a lot of time as well working with academic colleagues at the points where they need information about publishing, open publishing specifically. So the authors we're actually working with on projects, people who have potential open projects that they might want to bring to us or that they might want to discuss in general. But also people who want to explore open with no concrete plans at the moment, but who understand this is how they want to sort of disseminate their research moving forward. We'll also go to departments, work with research groups or individuals who are wanting to investigate open publishing and to understand it. And we can give our perspective of that. And we're very clear that that's the perspective that we're giving. We can't talk about open in the way that other presses would do it, but we can explain how we deliver open publishing. And one of the key elements for us is about building a community. So White Rose University Press was one of the founding members of the Open Institutional Publishing Association. Now, despite being the chair of this association, I have to read that off the slide every single time. I'm sorry about that, I don't know why. So OIPA launched really recently. We've only been around a couple of years. We've already got 22 members and associate members. And we support open access publishing in all its models and formats that as it happens in UK HEIs. So whether that's university presses or whether that's journal hosting platforms, internal offers, external offers, publishing via repositories, we find that there are shared challenges that all of us doing this at a small scale face. So coming together really helps us share our experience of doing this, but it also helps amplify the voice that we have. Because while individually we're very small, together we are making a significant change to the way open access publishing is delivered in the UK. And it's great to be able to share that voice with UKRI and other policy making bodies. So the opportunities for open access, I was putting this together and I started to feel that I was just writing about what we do. And then I felt, well, that's because that's all we do. We only do open access. So it's worth saying that this is open access from the perspective of a press that does open access as its sort of core function. And for us, the opportunity is really that we are so embedded with our institutions and within the academy that we have those shared goals. You know, there is a real push from the institutions to have that outreach, that equity, that engagement, and we are really well placed to support them in that. We can prioritise the needs of both the authors and the consumers of the content equally because they're all our audience. So we come at it from that mindset. We can work with them at all stages of the research process. We're not a publisher that they come to at the end. So because we are embedded within the academy, we can advise at any point that they need to get in touch. This is part of that scholarly comms piece. And we are increasingly seeing presses like ourselves being part explicitly of institutional strategy. So York, for example, one of my institutions, its strapline of the strategy currently is University for the Public Good. So a significant part of what they're doing is around opening their scholarship, the community engagement, and the equity and outreach, all of which is served by an open university press. So this is where those opportunities to work really closely with the institutions come through. And I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in a vague way later on, but that kind of the research culture change that we're seeing, being an ally within that is a really strong position to be in. Academics have a huge amount on their plates at the moment. There's huge amounts of tension through all the budgetary context that we're seeing, and being able to be a partner in that is a really strong position to be in. And open monographs particularly are bringing an opportunity for us, being able to come to that with a true open access focus. That occasionally you hear people talking about solving the problem of open access. For us, open access isn't a problem to solve, it's the point of success, if you see what I mean. So having that mindset and being able to work with academics who increasingly also have that mindset is something that's a real opportunity. And we can show them what's possible through the different routes of open publication, the digital expediencies that you can get through those formats, the usage, the reach beyond the traditional audiences. It's still the case a lot of non-open publications are academics talking to the academics that already know what they're saying because they've worked with them, they've been to the conferences. And reaching that wider audience is something that's now really important. And academics are seeing that. And the long format outputs mean that we're talking to academics who are now coming to this from a very different perspective. The conversations with arts, humanities, social sciences academics is a very different conversation than with academics with STEM, where the journal approach to open access has really gone in that direction, that it's not necessarily where we'd hoped it would go, I think, but it is where it is. So I've got one of those challenges slides as well with the nice aspirational photo. We've all been on Unsplash, so there we are. The changing research culture is a real challenge. There's so many moving parts. There's so many pressures on academics. They're being pulled in lots of different directions from their funders, from their departments. You know, they're all still within that culture where we're supposed to be no longer considering publication venue, but everybody still does. And so, you know, that tension between official stance and what they're seeing in practice is very real. And we have an opportunity, I think, with open monographs particularly to engage with that and to tease that out. If we can get that, if we can capitalise on the increasing academic focus on open access, we can help them move these things forward. And I think we do have to learn lessons from the approach to open journal publishing. Before I worked with White Rose, I was a librarian at the Bodleian here in Oxford. Very different. And at that point, we were just starting to support people with that move to open access and the whole act on acceptance. You don't really need to engage with the open conversation. It's just something you can achieve by ticking a box and putting it in a repository. And we made it so academics didn't have to think about this. And I think that with hindsight, we would have done them a better service if we'd helped them understand it more. And so I think that's where monographs gives us that real opportunity. But it is a challenging conversation to have. So it's moving it on from a compliance-led to a culture-led discussion around the benefits of open access. We're doing it in the very challenging financial context. I've touched on this. It's challenging across the board. And this is challenging for different funding models as well. So it's not just about the pressure on people's time, but it's also about whether subscription models are going to end up being sustainable, because library budgets, libraries aren't playing with this and not pretending they've got no money. So at the moment, we may be choosing between opening hours and content. And there's got to be a point where those things come to a head. And we're already seeing that with libraries cancelling deals and looking at other ways to provide content. But you can't underestimate the importance, I don't think, of open access in demonstrating the relevance of the activity that we're doing. We can no longer just talk to the closed ecosystem of universities talking to universities. If we want public funding, if we want public engagement, sharing the content, making it open, showing the relevance, the cultural relevance from the arts humanities side, the knowledge relevance, it is, it is why we matter. I know it sounds trite, but it's showing and sharing why we matter openly will win hearts and minds in a way that not doing is going to be a bit of a challenge. I also think, and this is a big ask, I work in OA. It's what I do pretty much all the time. I don't understand some of the ways that we define OA. I don't think there are shared, understandable definitions of some of these things. I know what diamond means, but you show me a definition of diamond that we are all using. I would really like it if someone could. And I think that, now we're seeing movement in terms of the way, for example, BPCs, the same letters mean book processing charge, book publication cost. We all use the letters, but not necessarily in the same way. And it's confusing, it makes things hard to navigate. And we as a university press sector have a real opportunity to work with the academy and come up with a shared language to help them understand it and to be clearer about what we are doing and make things more transparent. Because I think that true shared language of open access will go a long way to help with the engagement that we need academics to make. So that's what I think. What do you think?
Thanks, Kate. Okay, Ruth, over to you.
Hi. This is the first time I've used one of these, so this is slightly peculiar. I've gone really low tech, which particularly came from Imperial College, is probably to be frowned upon, but anyway. So I'm here to talk, I think, about my view from Imperial on university presses and OA. I said to Rhodri, we don't have a university press. And he said, that's okay. So I'll get to that. So Imperial College London, just for the context, so if I had slides, I'd probably be putting some numbers up, but I'm not going to assume everybody knows everything about us. So we're in West London. We have 8 campuses. If you do know of it, Imperial, you might know of it at South Kensington, but we're actually spreading out into West London, into White City. We also have a very nice campus in the countryside. Some of the numbers and the context is that I'm going to provide is kind of informs, I think, my view of the value of university presses, certainly to the research that our academics do. But I also tend to think of university presses, particularly in regard to monographs, but I don't always do that. We have around 23,000 students, so that runs from undergraduate through up to postgraduate research. We have 8,000 staff, about 50% of those are academic and research. We have very few teaching staff, but they're growing, and we do have some educational research, which provides a kind of interesting challenge, I think, particularly over the next few years, because they are going to start to publish more, and Imperial doesn't really quite know what to do with that, I think, because we have a very tight disciplinary focus, so we are STEM and business, and that is pretty much it. Imperial authors publish around 12,000 outputs a year, and those are primarily journal articles. I mean, this is where all of the focus is. From an open access perspective, we receive a number of open access funds, so you may well be familiar with some of those, so UKRI, Welcome and so on. We have an institutional open access fund as well, and we've been managing those now for about 10, 12 years, really when my OA journey started. The monograph collection, like I say, I mean, I often think of university presses in regards to monographs, and certainly I think the OA university presses are probably focusing particularly there, which is an interesting challenge for Imperial. So our monograph collection that we provide access to tends to reflect the disciplinary teaching and learning needs. So it tends to come from reading lists, textbook provision, and so on. And going back to that disciplinary focus, that's kind of where it gets interesting, because one of our challenges is how we, at Imperial, invest in, for example, university presses, particularly those that are starting to develop in open access, because the disciplinary focus is not necessarily one that aligns with the college's mission. But we want to support university presses, we want to support smaller presses, and we want to support a kind of equitable route into publishing, regardless of whether that is actually our authors publishing. So I mentioned we don't have a press. We've never had a press. We do have a name. I believe it's available, but I think we're going to be quite careful whether we give it to anybody. There isn't any particular grassroots desire to have a press either. I think, I mean, even if somebody came to me at the college and said we want a press, it would have to be a really clear vision. I wouldn't want to add yet more to the monograph and journal publishing world. Nothing wrong with it, but there is already too much publishing out there, frankly. And so I think if we did have a press, being Imperial, which I have always said, we'd need to publish something differently. Chris was talking about reproducible research. It wouldn't be me if I didn't go on about negative results. For something different, I think, if we had a press, which I don't think yet other people are doing. As regards to us being a institutional publisher, we do have a repository, so I could claim maybe we do some publishing. We do actually have a growing number of, for the college, non-traditional outputs, but not if you're in arts and humanities, you probably wouldn't see that. But we do work with research groups and departments to get grey literature deposited. So this might be, like I say, if we ever had a press, that might be something we'd focus on. That's primarily because research groups are sticking things up on PDFs and putting on the web pages, and that's kind of horrible with regards to discoverability and curation and preservation. So we do have some knowledge, but we're certainly not publishers in the way that you all are. That repository, though, does provide access, like I say, to a lot of outputs which aren't journal articles because, well, they're clearly hosted elsewhere. We did see a drive towards deposit in the repository because of the Ref Open Access policy, but COVID actually led to the deposit of quite a lot of really key research outputs, a lot of working papers, particularly those from Neil Ferguson's group. Neil Ferguson is probably a name you're familiar with. You may or may not want to think about it. Like I said, particularly from the library's perspective at Imperial, what we're really trying to balance with regards to funding open access presses and open access publishing is taking into account the budgetary situation that Kate's already referred to, but we want to invest in open access publishing infrastructures. We clearly need to enable our Imperial researchers to publish on open access, and where that is going to involve costs, clearly we want to be able to help them with those. But we are also incredibly aware that now, particularly the open access publishing culture, I think that's grown up in the UK, has meant that has created an inequitable culture in that authors who are outside of the UK and within the UK don't have access to publishing. And so what we really want to do is try and invest, even if there's not a disciplinary focus, that we can perhaps link to either the content that our authors are publishing or our students are publishing, studying. But if we can invest in models and routes that mean that other research can be published on open access, that clearly widens the ability for those researchers to get their research seen. It also expands the potential, the research literature that our students and staff have. We're talking a lot more about, at the college, for example, around geographic bias in the choices that people make with regards to the literature they recommend on their reading lists. Imperial, as I say, is STEM. I think some people, perhaps at the college, may say that science is objective, and we don't need to be looking at the kind of conversations around perhaps decolonisation or whatever word you want to use. But I don't think that's true. I think we have to think really carefully about how knowledge is created. And a lot of the publishing world is based on the Northern Hemisphere, and it reflects a way that knowledge was communicated and disseminated historically. So we want to be thinking about how we basically increase access. How am I doing for time? The difficulty is, I mean, particularly for STEM and open access monographs, there isn't perhaps the kind of market yet, so that's kind of interesting for us as to where we go. We started off some years ago being able to invest in initiatives such as the Open Library of Humanities. There are now more models, there are more presses. We're starting to have to think, do we have to start to narrow down our focus into where we invest? We don't really want to do that because we do want to keep contributing. I'm quite keen we don't necessarily perpetuate a book publishing or processing charge culture in the way that we have done for APCs. It's created inequities for sure. That probably depends on the type of OA publisher you are. So, but again, it's those smaller ones, the ones doing kind of different models that we're kind of wanting to think about. And when we were talking about this, one of the issues I mentioned was around the impact on research assessment and research culture. I wouldn't be me if I didn't mention it. At Imperial, the research assessment culture is critical, as it is for most universities. But that does, of course, then influence what people publish. I think we publish more than enough journal articles globally, but people keep publishing them because that's the thing that everybody thinks is going to get them kudos, credit. It's the output that gets submitted to ref. And I am really keen that we think differently about how we can communicate research beyond the journal article. Ref in particular drives a lot of the way that research is communicated, I feel, in the UK, whether academics think it or not. As Kate was speaking, I was and raised the budgetary question. I was trying to think, can we take a positive? can we reframe that? Because we at Imperial, despite the fact that we're not too badly funded, we are facing cuts. So I think, particularly with UPs and the potential opportunities, but the way that there might be opportunities to try different models, perhaps we can use the fact that we want to invest and we want to move away from the more traditional models to try and think about how we can use what resources we do have in trying out different open access publishing models and different ways of making research content available, so it isn't focused primarily on the monograph and the journal article. I mean, in arts and humanities, for example, there's a huge range of different outputs. Within STEM, it's pretty much stayed at that level. And maybe this is a chance that we can think more creatively. And certainly Imperial, I would like us to be able to use our library budget that we have to reinvest, considering those different types of output, if we can. I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Kate. So, yeah, we'll have plenty of time for some questions. I have a couple of questions first. So, Kate, you mentioned about your university pressing within your wider institution, like closely within the wider institution. And so, how do you think your UP can address the approach to open access more at your institution more widely, rather than just publishing open access?
So we do, how do we can change it more wisely? See, the thing is, if I knew the answer to that, I think it would be there. I think all we can do is to keep having the conversations. I think that for those of us that work in open access all the time, you get to the point where you think everybody's on the same page with it and that people understand what you're talking about, people have all bought into it. And actually there is a huge range of where people are at different levels within the institution and for different motivating factors. You know, you can talk to an academic and they're incredibly keen on open access from a consumer point of view. They want all their content that they read to be open, but they're not necessarily as keen on publishing open because they want to publish with the traditional route, the press they've always worked with, who perhaps don't offer open in the way that they want. And so it's not even a case of moving open access forward for the institution, but you know, within an individual you can get conflicting perspectives on open access and when it's a good thing. So I think there's a point of recognising that the conversation is ongoing, and that's where being embedded and being part of that scholarly commons solution, being able to talk about doing this in practice is really useful. We're not advocating because we're an ally for open access, we are actually delivering it. So when academics come back and say, yes, but would it really be like that? We can say, yes, no, it really is like that. And look, here's the thing, and here's someone we've worked with who's at your institution that you can talk to, who's delivered open access publishing this way. And I think that's actually something that we've started doing a lot more of. You know, with the best will in the world, you can go to... Hello? No, you can go to lots of meetings and I feel a bit like a double glazing salesman sometimes going, hello, would you like to buy into my ethos of my press? It's marvellous. But actually what works is academics talking about it. And as more and more academics are publishing and seeing the benefits of open publishing, whichever route they've gone through and whichever format they're using, actually that is what is making the change more and more. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, it did.
Good. I got lost.
I think so. Now it is? Yeah, okay. Well, expertly answered in just the time it took my microphone to be back online, so thank you. Ruth, so you don't have a UP, as you mentioned, at Imperial, but where do the kind of open access publishing conversations happen within Imperial in that case? Like, these kind of conversations, where do they happen at Imperial?
Well, academics wanting to publish on open access.
Well, about Imperial's ethos about OA publishing, does it happen solely within the library, or does it happen more widely in the university?
Well, as Kate was talking, I was thinking about academics and open access publishing. I mean, they initially were, well, I guess primarily driven by the library, but in respect to a response to funder policies. So the kind of initial conversations were related to, well, my funder now requires me to make my work available in open access. But that's going back over a decade now. The library, because it got given the funder grants, was therefore then also, of course, the place to lead those conversations. But also we had a repository, which wasn't massively well used a decade or so ago. It was just we had a repository because everybody had a repository, I think, before my days in open access, but they've been around a long time now. There were obviously academics prior to all of that, and Imperial, the HEP community, as you might imagine, if you know about it, is significant, and so the archive, of course, has been something that a lot of our academics have used significantly.
HEP is in high energy physics.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. That's as much as I know on that particular front, to be fair. Not a physicist. So there's been pockets of people who've known about open access. What's really driven an understanding, though, was, I have to say, I mean, the ref has lots of different, you can talk about it in lots of different ways. One of its positive outcomes was its announcement for Ref 21 of its open access policy, and that obviously that drove conversations, and it did mean that people further up in the college had to perhaps become a little bit more familiar. But what we have moved from now is an understanding of open access in the sense of, oh, it's something I have to do because my funder wants me to, or asks me to I think, actually an understanding of why open access publishing can be a good thing in regards to the dissemination of your research, the access to it. And so I think the bulk of our academics now do understand why we're talking about open access publishing and an open research culture and the value that has. So yes, the library is the area service, I suppose, that probably is where people come to for information and an expectation of leading the conversations. But we note there are people across the college now who will talk about it and understand it as a concept.
Okay, thank you. Kate, so you mentioned that you're a small publisher. So how do you think your scale limits and also benefits you when it comes to open access?
So in terms of benefits, we do work really closely with the authors that we work with, particularly on monographs. We work with our journal editors as well to support them in how they want to work with their journals. But particularly with the book publishing, we can be incredibly hands-on in whatever way an author would need. And we've seen that even though our throughput is growing, it's growing more slowly. COVID was not our friend, so we're going to see quite a lot of things that have been delayed come through in one lump, which is exciting. But quite a lot of authors that we've worked with have come back to work with us again, which I think is a really good sign in terms of the experience that they've had. We've also had people come to us because authors who've worked with us have recommended them. And we can do initiatives. So far we've worked with Leeds and Sheffield. York haven't taken this forward yet, but we support the Institutional Early Career Publishing Prize, so that helps doctoral graduates from the two universities work their research up into a book proposal, not publishing the thesis, but actually what they would publish their research as a monograph. And we can work with them, and the prize winners are then able to work with us as a press through the normal commissioning process, but with that extra layer of pedagogical support as first time. And that's been incredibly useful because it's meant we can again be embedded within all the education that we can, supporting the sessions for PGRs on, how to get published, types of presses out there, is open, useful for your subject area, because as a press we will be right for some people and not for other projects. So I guess in terms of how it limits, at the moment I don't think it does. Okay. In that we work with a publishing partner to deliver the actual, I don't sit and copy edit. We work with people who do that professionally. So that makes it quite scalable. I think that what limits us more is kind of visibility, really, and that's where working with OIPA is a really strong thing, because that brings scale to the group, and we can have a voice, because we do have a shared perspective on most things.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think we should take some questions from the audience. There's one, Ross at the top.
Hi there. I'm Director of Open Access at Arcadia, so naturally I'm quite interested in this session. Ruth, I think you were being very modest, because, of course, Imperial are one of those lovely institutions which has recently instituted a rights retention policy. There's a wave of rights retention going on at the moment across UK universities. I'm seeing 40 plus, 50, 60. I'd also say that all research institutions in Norway have a rights retention policy right now, so this is a thing that's happening. How's rights retention going at Imperial? Because, of course, open access can be achieved in many different ways and not just via the publisher. Actually, universities can provide open access themselves. Secondly, I'd also add on to that, of course, publishers may be over-relying on the value of their copyright version, the version of record, when it comes to discussions about AI and AI licensing, if in parallel there are also these AAM copies in repositories that are virtually identical, particularly from the point of view of AI training, that may reduce the value of these AI licenses, I would suggest, to publishers. But anyway, the question is about rights retention. And secondly, I'd also like to ask you about your opinion of the subscribe to open business model. But start with rights retention.
Okay. So, yes. Well, in one sense, I would be modest. Chris Banks, who was our previous Director of Library Services, spearheaded the work on rights retention here in the UK, following particularly Harvard's lead. So Imperial's had a rights retention policy, which is effectively, we had an open access policy. It is now our open access policy for publications. So that policy was implemented from January last year. It impacts on journal articles and conference proceedings. We haven't looked at monographs. I know some institutions are. It hasn't caused a huge amount of attention in the university, I think, because of the fact that journal articles are, I would say, king, and because of the current read and publish agreements that we have. In actual fact, a vast majority of our output publishing is through agreements that you would refer to as gold open access. So the number of manuscripts that we have made available on open access in our repository through the rights retention policy is actually quite small, which surprised me, but then can say it occurred to me that the version of record is the one that is being made available. However, it is a policy that was supported throughout the college, and it could be more used depending on what happens with read and publish agreements. We are very keen to move away from the APC model. It's just not affordable, and kind of going back to the points I was saying about equitable access, we want to start to ensure that the agreements that we have with publishers enable not just our authors to publish, but other authors. So we don't want to be paying just for our authors to be able to publish effectively. And so the rights retention policy then may become more useful to our authors if the version of record isn't going to be published on gold open access. I don't think that our authors would be particularly concerned by that. A lot of them already share a lot of their preprints, so I think that if it were the accepted manuscript that was the open version, they probably wouldn't be too concerned. But I think it's going to be an interesting couple of years. I'll put it on that with regards to where rights retention policies can be used. On subscribe to open, that's a good question. So I don't manage our content budget. I am keen, as you may have guessed, to ensure that the widest access to research as is possible. I'm also very conscious that this isn't actually something for free. I kind of get upset when people say libraries want everything for free. It's not that at all. We know this costs. It's about thinking about how those costs can make the research much more openly available. So subscribe to open does appeal to me, because we are not saying that library budgets should not continue to fund publishing models, including journal publishing, and so we need, therefore, to make sure we continue to do that. And if subscribe to open is the best model for a publisher, then I have always backed it at Imperial. It does mean that the ones that have come through, particularly the ones that we've been able to invest in, or rather continue subscribing to, it means sometimes a redistribution of costs, so things may appear to be potentially more expensive for institutions, but I think some of the ones that we've seen so far have been predicated on in 2 to 3 years, actually things will even out. My view is I am very keen for publishers to work with us in the UK, primarily, particularly through JISC. That's very helpful. They are building up a lot of knowledge, and obviously you get a lot of access to a lot of institutions rather than coming to each of us individually. I don't mind talking to people individually, but to be honest, there's a lot of different HE institutions. And I am very aware that Imperial is quite distinct in a lot of ways to others. But I'm really keen to explore models and don't want people to use the costs as a reason to say, oh, well, we're not going to do that because it might cost more. I think the summary is subscribe to open. Bring us the models. We can only look at them. But I think as a way of saying to libraries, keep your subscription budgets. If that's what makes the most sense to you, that's still what you're going to be paying for. But the bonus is that content can then be made open access and not just for your authors. That feels positive to me. I know there's a lot more to it than that. But.
Any other questions in the audience? Okay, so I have another question, actually. Oh, sorry, was there one?
Someone's hand.
Thank you.
Up.
Thank you. That was great, by the way. Thank you both very much. Anthony Collins, Liverpool University Press. I'm interested in books specifically. So most university presses are predominantly books focused. They're predominantly active in the humanities. And open access in the humanities and at book length is hard because it's by magnitude more expensive, and perceptions of value are different. So an average BPC for a university press for 100,000 words, copy edited, peer reviewed, paid peer review, might be £8,500, and a 6,000 word article in Nature might be £11,000. Figure that one out. So we're trying to find our way with this, and it occurs to me just what a wonderful outlier Imperial is, because there are models that involve kind of internal institutional support, and I think White Rose is a great example of that sharing of the burden across the 3 institutions. But otherwise, what we're asking is for libraries to move beyond institutional self-interest, really. And we do that. We have a couple of models that try to do that, and we are thinking ahead, 60-70% of the income for those kind of collective subscription models for open access books are coming from the US, places like the California Digital Library. God knows, frankly, what that looks like. In due course, given the uncertainty in US higher education, we're seeing big cuts and existential problems in UK higher education. How, in this context, can we do more to, I guess, advocate for libraries and other institutional budget holders to move beyond the institutional self-interest?
Easy question for you.
I'm glad he's asked that of you. That's
Mm?
great. I'm glad he asked you.
Help advocate. That's a really good question.
I mean, to be fair, I think you've already covered this a little bit, talking about that you were looking beyond your discipline and looking to support authors from other areas.
Yes, we are. I think, I suppose it's, I mean, part of it is the services that are being provided, and also I suppose the principles behind the publishing press. I mean, going back to the equity side, what I'm really interested in is what presses are doing to address that bias in publishing, academic publishing. I'm also really interested in what the quality process is. There is, I know I've mentioned it several times, I view it, there is too much. There is too much academic publishing. People have, particularly in journals, people have chased journals hugely, and there is poor quality out there, we know that. There is too much for people to read. I mean, sure, AI might be able to help that, but if it's crap, let's face it, going in, it's not going to help, even if AI can read 100,000 articles for you. They're all terrible articles. So what are presses doing with regards to quality? How are they working with authors? What is the rigor piece, I suppose? But also how are authors being helped in understanding publishing, and particularly the support perhaps for ECRs? Are there different ways, different outputs that the press can support, or kind of show a willingness to discuss different ways in which research could be disseminated? It is really hard because in the UK our research assessment culture is so heavily predicated towards the journal, but I think things are shifting a little bit, and I think that libraries are very keen to advocate to their institutions how they can use their library budgets to encourage those different types of outputs, and to be able to help researchers who do want to publish differently, who do want to communicate differently. I hope that's not too woolly.
And I should say, actually, one of the things Hannah wanted to talk about, if she was here, was about research assessment culture more widely and the work that could be done on that. But that's a separate discussion, I think.
Happy to talk about it any time.
Yeah. Any final questions from the audience? Yep, in the middle there.
Thank you very much. Joanna Donnelly from Open Farmer. I'd be interested to know whether you've got any recommendations for outputs that you think would be good for STEM publishing as an alternative to the more traditional journal formats.
I think it's... So journal articles are fine as a way of... as the end product. But they don't tell you a lot. I think particularly, I mean, I am obviously talking from a STEM background, but what I'm interested in is how our researchers can can communicate the entire research life cycle. So I guess the micro publication, which I think is used particularly around for octopus and so on, but the different outputs that come from a research project. Say the journal article happens right at the end, but how do we encourage people to actually think about what is happening and what they can communicate whilst they're doing that research? So the protocols and the methods. I do think that people should be talking more about when things went wrong. But so thinking about what can be published, so that things can be reproducible, but so that people actually kind of recognise that failure is part of research. I'm not quite sure what that form that would take, but I think anything that kind of just generates a conversation about that, because it seems to me that, again, partly it comes back to the assessment culture, but everything is about success, and research is not about success, and I don't mean that negatively. It is about just trying and trying and trying, but I think kind of sharing, but that is okay. So building up a culture where that is the case. But things around data, software code, the things that also help you work, but help other researchers actually see what you have done and what you have used. Yeah, that sort of tracking, what is it that's coming out of the research that can be communicated about that research, how it was done, what underpins it, that isn't a 6-page article with a heap of citations, which is fine, citations are great. Talking as someone that's written our reference management guides in a past life. But
Kate, do you have anything?
So one of the things that we've seen quite recently are people coming wanting to publish project reports. So it may well be that there is going to be a journal article as well, but that actually they wanted to do more of a story of what happened. And the formats we've seen them come to us with are it's longer than journal article length, but it's not long format length, if you see what I mean. But it would be an output of the funded project. And I think that is where people are starting to do more of that explicit linking of the data set that's in this repository, the grant proposal that they can share openly this way, and they want to bring it together as a holistic, this is how we did this piece of research package that then also has an associated version of record article in whatever format comes out. And I think that with my other repositories manager hat on, the increased use of the identifiers, not just the DOIs, but RAW and ORCID and this sort of thing, that helps bring these things together and make it, this is where AI laying on the top of that can really make that a coherent thing for people, as opposed to people having to track all this down as they've been doing recently. So that's where we see perhaps a different format of output.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's exactly 11:30, so it's exactly the right time to finish. Thank you very much, Kate and Ruth, for your excellent presentations and for answering all the questions. And thank you to everyone who asked the question as well. We have a half-hour coffee break coming up in a minute, and then afterwards we're back in this room for the session on research ethics and integrity. Anyway, so if everyone could just thank Ruth and Kate, that'd be great.